Can you hear me?
hmm
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
How are you, Asher?
I'm doing well. And yourself?
Good. Doing good.
It's been a minute.
It has. Where do you live?
I'm back in North Georgia right now, in
All
Dalton.
right. Where were you?
Once I graduated, I went to the Midwest. I spent about a year and a half in Louisiana, then went up to Plainfield, Illinois for about 6 months, and then back to Augusta, Georgia for the last 3.5 years, or almost 4 years, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Been that long, huh?
Yep.
Time flies.
It sure does. I recently started this podcast. I put out the first episode October of this year, and
hmm
the whole idea behind it was just to talk to the people that I've met over the course of the past few years, and just over my whole life, just thinking of the people that have influenced me in
hmm
positive ways, and just kind of getting a sense of who they are and what they're about to share with the world, and just to really highlight people like yourself, to just say one, thank you, and also just to allow you to share your knowledge, what you're up to, and with other people that may not know you or that may not be privileged to that information.
Well, thank you. I'm honored. I'm honored that you're having me on, and thank you for thanking me. And I don't even remember what I said to you when and what struck you, or I know you referenced sort of that 80% of the jobs are not in are in the hidden job market idea.
Right. I think you're the first person that kind of highlighted that for me, because I noticed, I want to say we spoke in 2013, which was my senior year of college. So
Mm-hmm.
I was looking to do something different in order to get a full-time job, because what I was doing, co-oping for 3 semesters and like back to back to back, it just didn't seem to work out in my favor, and the career
Mm-hmm.
fairs weren't going the way I wanted them to go. So it was like,
Mm-hmm.
something's not right. I got to change my approach. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe I received your information through a mutual friend. It was Mrs. Graby.
Oh, Nancy, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Nancy Graby, because I went to college with her son at Southern Poly before
Mm-hmm.
now it's Kennesaw, and then we just stayed in touch, and I just started reaching out to people asking for help, and he was like, "Yeah, my mom knows somebody," and then she gave me your information, and we met up.
That's great. That's super encouraging to hear. I mean, I'm sure you have, and increasingly as you get older, will more and more. Just you say things to people, you don't know if it's falling on deaf ears, or you have no idea what they're going to do with it. To have people come back later and say, wow, you said such and such. I took that to heart. I put it into practice, and here's how it turned out for me. Is you just don't realize the lives you touch, and so it's deeply encouraging that that I said something that helped you, and that you. It's kind of like the 99, who go off and don't turn around and thank you, but the one who does, and you're like, wow, that's really special. So thank you.
That's a great point. Uh, if I may ask you this question, who do you say you are?
Oh my gosh.
Take your time with it.
Well, interestingly, I have always been a relatively introspective person. And over the last year have been to a therapist, which has been deeply encouraging, just trying to sort out some things from my past.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Really, really helpful. And I have, as of late, really been studying the Enneagram, if you're familiar with the Enneagram at all.
No, what's that?
It's a hot topic right now. It's actually an ancient tool which highlights 9 different personality types.
Okay.
And I use a lot of personality type instruments in my job at work,
Gotcha.
but I use much simpler things like DISC.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, people are familiar with DISC or Myers-Briggs, which a lot of people are familiar with their MBTI style, 4-letter style, and all that. But according to the Enneagram, which I'm just now beginning to become more acquainted with, I am a person, and some of this is not new to me at all, and some of it is brand new to me, but it rings true. I'm an interesting mix of a very people-oriented person and being someone who is both very extroverted and loves to adventure and have fun and get out there and be, we went to Ireland a few years ago, and which my heritage comes from Ireland for 500 years.
Wow.
And when we were over there, my last name is Dillon, and there was Dillon this, Dillon that, everywhere. And the people of Ireland were so warm and so friendly, and I annoyed both my wife and the couple we were there with because they just felt like I didn't know a stranger and would talk to everybody. And I felt that way, especially over there. They were like that too. As a culture, they were very warm and friendly and wanted to sort of engage with you. Gotcha. So I'm a mix of that, and also someone who's always sort of thinking deeply about my motivation, other people's motivation, what's below the surface.
Right.
I've engaged recently in a more disciplined daily meditation practice of really just trying to clear my mind and kind of just get in touch with God. And I believe that knowing God and knowing yourself more go hand in hand.
Yeah, yeah.
So, me, like all of us, I'm an interesting mix of contradictions and nuances and stuff. It's a very hard question to answer, but at a high level, I guess that's how I would respond to that.
Gotcha. That's a great response. And what's funny is that I've been studying the DISC as well. I saw a therapist for the first time last year and kind of going through that. I don't know if you say digging up the past, but maybe like learning how to deal with the past in a healthier manner, where a lot of things that I may not have wanted to confront, I'm confronting it in a better way. And like having studied the DISC a little bit before, I took it last year, I want to say really for the first time, because whenever I started my first full-time job out of college, they gave us the DISC, but they didn't break it down the way it was broken down to me recently. And I think what they did was take the DISC and Myers-Briggs and they kind of put them together. And I'm going to go up next weekend to Lansing, Michigan to be coached and trained to become somebody that can facilitate giving the DISC assessment to somebody and being able to explain to them like what they are or how their personality kind of shakes out looking at the 4 letters, the DISC. And for myself, I fall in the latter category with the S and the C, being somebody that's more supportive role, very structure oriented, and like you said, like yourself, someone that's very like a deep thinker. You want to know the question behind questions that people ask, or you try to ask the questions or answer the questions that aren't asked whenever you're communicating with people. So it's good to be in that like-mindedness.
Yeah. So I'm a certified DISC facilitator, and we use it at Ronstadt where I work in leadership training all the time. My coaching, I often will use DISC with people, have them take the assessment, and we'll talk about that. And if you think of them, in the upper left, if I were to do this backwards, in the upper left, you have a D, in the upper right, you have I.
Right.
Two styles are very active. They're very much make it happen, very sort of take action and ask questions later. Sometimes they ask for forgiveness, not permission.
Yeah.
Right. On the right, you have the I up here in the upper right, and then the lower right, you have the S.
Mm-hmm.
And both of those styles are people oriented.
Yeah.
So they are all about the connection, the relationship. They can be perceived as being unconcerned about results.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they don't care about results, it's just that they're more oriented towards the people and the relationship.
Right.
On the bottom, the opposite of the top, you have the S on the bottom right and the C on the bottom left.
Yeah.
Both of them, as you just alluded to, are responsive instead of active. So you got the D, the I, active,
Yeah.
the C and the S, responsive, and they're much more oriented to not taking action, but stepping back first and understanding their environment. They would be like, how in the world can you take action? We don't even know what we're dealing with here.
Right. Right.
So they're more likely to ask for permission instead of forgiveness. And then on the right, you have tasks. You have the D in the upper left and the C on the lower left.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both task oriented, the opposite of the I and the S. And so they can be perceived as being unconcerned about people.
Got you.
So when you understand those outer lying things, the task orientation for the D and the C on the right, on the left, the people orientation for the I and the S on the right,
Mm-hmm.
and they're different. And then you also mix in the D and the I both being active,
right,
versus the C and the S being responsive. It really helps you understand each of the styles and the potential conflict, because you have the D and the S opposites.
right, right.
One's active and task oriented, and one's responsive and people oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Or you have the I, who's people oriented and active, being the opposite of the C, who's task oriented and responsive. And when you end up, what you notice is a lot of times when people are, their significant other is the opposite style.
Right, right.
It's the whole opposites attract idea.
Yeah. And what's funny about that is the mastermind group that I joined through Eric Thomas and Breathe University, they've really been pushing it as a way to help people understand who they are on like a personal level, and to help them interact not only in business but in relationships and in anything that they do. They kind of draw a lot of entrepreneurs. So they encourage a lot of entrepreneurs to say, what you're doing is great, but one, you need to narrow your focus, and two, you need to start to build a team around yourself. So then that way you operate in your strengths, but your weaknesses or your undeveloped strengths, as people may say, you find people that are able to do that, and you basically create a vision that encourages them to help you with your mission, so that you're not somebody that's dominant, like you were saying, and task oriented, where you just, this needs to get done. But it's like you have to learn how to relate to people a little bit. But if you can't do that, like, let somebody else come beside you that can deal with the people and you deal with the task. And maybe when they're having like a group meeting, they say, okay, you stay out there because you're too mean for a minute. But seeing them do that, and they've even taken it to a school level, where he wrote a book recently and basically helping children to kind of understand like what their quote unquote superpower is. And he called the book You Ain't the Boss of Me, saying that like most kids, or I guess most humans, kind of respond like that. It's like, I don't necessarily want to boss you, but I don't want to be bossed and told what to do. But then it's, if you understand what you're naturally gifted at, then you can better understand like, oh, okay, like this is what I'm doing. And then if somebody's telling me to do something, they're not like they can either speak to me in a better way, or I can learn how to receive the information a little bit better. So I just thought that that was something cool, because the first time I heard about the disc, it it didn't seem like it was encouraged for people that were before 18 or 21 years old, because it's like your brain isn't fully developed yet. But I guess as different people are working on this, they probably realize that people are already naturally inclined to um, certain behaviors just based on where they grow up, like the environment they're in and things like that. And I think somebody broke it down to like a percentage that each part of the population kind of falls under due to different studies.
Yeah, I've always heard that your disc style, behavioral style, is pretty much set by the time you're 6.
Right, right, yeah.
Even though you're going to continue to grow and develop and be influenced by things, your basic style and what your understanding of what the way you should be, and it's the nature nurture, the nature what you really are genetically and all that, the nurture what you become as a result of your parents, your coaches, your
Right.
teachers, all those influences really pretty much going to continue to influence you, but your basic style is set pretty early.
Mm-hmm.
And we may think that 25% of the population is each one in each quadrant, but it doesn't come that way at all.
Right, right.
At all.
I think it's like 15 or something for the D's, and then like 20 something for I's, S, and I think maybe either the S's or the C's are like the majority, like 30% or something like that.
Yeah, 19% are high D. 27% are high I. So that rolls up to like 46% are more active oriented.
Right, right.
On the bottom, 14% are high C on the bottom left. That's the smallest percentage.
Right.
And by far the biggest percentage is the S's, and they make up 40%. So that's 54% are responsive, more step back, study, first. So there's all kinds of implications to that.
Right.
One of the things I tell people, there's a disproportionate number of people in leadership that are high D.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people who are high Ds, okay, yeah, it's great that you're a leader. Be careful though, because statistically speaking, you're only 27% of the population, which means that 73% of the population is not a high D. And if you add up the I's and the S's, they make up 67%. 67%. In other words, 2/3 of the population are people oriented.
Right, right.
Task oriented, like the D is. So.
Right. And I guess that makes more sense, and that goes to the point of why, somebody came up with this assessment to say, here's the demographics of people that you deal with, and also like how to better like communicate with people, so that if you're in the, you said either if you're in the smaller percentage, like say less than 30%, and you're trying to talk to 70% of the world, you have to speak differently. Otherwise, you're only going to be able to talk to people like yourself. And then if you can't reach 70% of the world, that's like a huge market share or huge opportunities and things like that. So then you'll just be kind of stuck. And what's funny is that with Black Friday sales and everything coming up, different people have like programs and things that they do. And I think the group that works with Eric Thomas, they had a presentation yesterday. I missed it, but I was able to get the PDF slides from it. And the main thing that they do is branding, like personal branding. And what they explained was the same concept, and saying that whenever you're branding, you've got to be able to talk to those different groups, because otherwise, if you just talk to like your sole group, then that's only like a short term.
Yep. Yeah. This is huge, right? And I do a ton of disc training in my day job. And one of the main things I really try to get people to do is get to a point where they can make an educated guess at someone's style.
Right.
so that they can then adjust their communication style, which makes you much better able to connect with people, much better able to influence people if
Mm.
you sort of speak their language.
Right.
So yeah, there's all kinds of advantages to it. It's a it's an ancient idea. Actually, the Babylonians initially came up with this idea in like 700 plus BC.
Hmm.
There were four primary styles of behavior. They thought it was influenced by the elements: earth, wind, fire, water.
Right.
And then the Greeks picked up on that and they changed it, like they changed everything, to be more internal to an individual.
Hmm.
And they called them the humors or the temperaments,
Mm.
and different words for each of the styles. But then where we get it nowadays is from a fascinating gentleman who was a behavioral psychologist in the early 20th century named William Marston.
Hmm.
He's a fascinating guy. He's also the creator of the systolic blood pressure measurement that was initially used in the lie detector test.
Hmm.
And he's the creator of the Wonder Woman cartoon that got made into a movie.
Huh. That's
Yeah, he
pretty cool.
was quite the Renaissance man. A
Yeah.
very interesting guy, but he framed it the way we use it now.
Got you. And what's funny about the way we use it, I guess, like you said, people keep trying to reinvent the wheel because um, the way it was first explained to me was just the letters. But then the person that kind of rebranded it and put his DNA on it, he basically associated it with animals, and I think that's been done before. But what he used was the gorilla, flamingo, chameleon, and turtle, and it kind of helped him with the language barrier that he came across in Latin America because he was trying to explain it the
Mhm.
way he'd been training other people on it, but it just wasn't coming across. But it was like
Mhm.
with the gorilla, people were able to identify, okay, this is like someone powerful, domineering, like
Mhm.
demanding, driving. And then with the flamingo, they're like, okay, they're always in packs, they're always social creatures, um, very they're very lively. And then the
Mhm.
chameleon, they kind of
Aye.
fade into the background, like they always match their surroundings, and
Mhm.
they it really speaks to that like support type system, people oriented, like you were saying. And then the turtles, they may be super slow, but they're always precise, always
Mhm.
accurate. You never see a turtle as roadkill, but they get to where they're going.
Mhm. Yeah, the thing is, DISC was never copywritten, and so it's in the public domain. So
Right.
you'll see a ton of different companies doing stuff with DISC and branding it their own way. I've seen one company that took that same idea, but they used all birds. So
Mm.
the D was a bald eagle,
Yeah.
the I was a parrot, the S was a dove, and the C was an owl.
Mm.
Same idea, you
Right.
know.
Right. But
So
it
yeah.
just speaking to those same qualities, like you were saying,
Mhm. Yeah,
that's cool.
it is fascinating stuff.
Like how, when did you come across this, and like what kind of drew you to the disc and that this type of training?
I think I probably first came across this. Well, I know exactly when I first came across it. I was living in Massachusetts and trying to avoid the sun. Uh,
No, you're good.
I
Oh.
was living in Massachusetts, and I was in sales, and I was selling to a company out in Framingham, just west of Boston. And
Mm.
I went into this company called the Cleaver Company,
Hmm.
and so started finding out what they did. Turns out John Cleaver was a sort of disciple of William Marston's.
Mm.
And he started this company, the Cleaver Company, and they developed all these tools after Marston passed away and stuff, and did what a lot of companies now are doing too. That's where I first ran into it, and at that time, I was fascinated with anything that could help me better understand myself and other people. That's
Right.
been a sort of an overarching passion my whole life, is better understanding myself and better understanding other people. Like I'm fascinated with emotional intelligence,
Hmm.
work of Daniel Goleman. He's one of the thought leaders in emotional intelligence. And
Yeah,
same, that kind of leads into the Enneagram and all this stuff too. So,
gotcha. That makes sense. I think I have that book. I need to read it, but I'm making my way around to it just one at a time, and actually taking these books that are action items, like, and applying the action and not just reading it to say I read the book.
there's so much to be read and learned out there. It's intimidating.
Yeah.
So
So
good.
so then you were introduced to it there. So like, did you interact with it at that point, or did you
Yeah.
kind of leave it and come back to it later?
No, I interacted with it then. I took the DISC assessment. I was really interested. They had at that time for that company, and I don't know, many companies nowadays won't touch this topic
Mm-hmm.
because they want to be guilty of using DISC as a hiring tool,
Mm.
then end up being sued for it being discrimination or
Right,
something.
right. And because
Um,
they're trying to fit the right pieces where they need it versus just having it be free and open.
yeah, and so, but they had what they called the constellation. It was disc. It was different disc patterns
Mm-hmm.
of careers, and so I was already fascinated with people's careers, and I had gotten out of the full time ministry in '94.
Mm-hmm.
Been out of the full time ministry for about 4 years at that point, but
When
I
you
was.
say ministry, you were a minister?
Mhm.
Okay.
I had worked in the full time ministry for about 8 years
Okay.
right out of college, and that's what took my wife and I from Colorado, where I'm originally from,
Mm-hmm.
to Massachusetts. And then we worked. I worked for a year and a half in the full time ministry in Colorado.
Gotcha.
Massachusetts, I was not in the ministry for a year and a half, but then we got married, and then I went into the full time ministry, and we were together in the full time ministry for 6.5 more years. So I had gotten out of the full-time ministry and, was trying to figure out what should I do for a career? What am I good at? What am I
Right.
interested in? So anything dealing with understanding, like I said, myself and other people and careers and all that was fascinating to me. And so I was helping a lot of other people.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I do now, besides my working in leadership training for a large staffing company, I have my own coaching business,
Okay.
and I do a lot of career coaching and life coaching.
Mm.
So, so I'll use all kinds of assessments and stuff to try to help people with their careers. And so
Gotcha.
it really resonated with me when I ran into the Cleaver company and they had this career constellation based off of your DISC style and all that. I've probably taken the DISC assessment maybe 8 or 9 different times in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and it has virtually turned out to be the same pattern pretty much every time.
Gotcha. Has
So,
it has it changed much? I know they say it, for some people it has a tendency to change slightly around major life events. Has that been a case for you?
it's changed a little bit. I mean, I'm always a high I,
Mm-hmm.
secondarily a high S,
Okay.
and depending on the job I was in,
Yeah.
my I would maybe go up a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Everything would maybe shift just a little bit, but it
Right.
never changed places. Like I never went from being a high I, and and a lower C to being a high C and a lower I. That never happened. None of them actually changed. Becoming higher than any of the others
Right.
compared to before. But they did go up or down a little bit. Like when I was in a sales role, my D came up, as you
Right.
can imagine. For a
Yeah.
sales type role, you got to be more driven.
Right.
And when I was in a training role, which I'm in now, my D would drop down a little bit and my S would go up a little bit, which makes sense.
Right.
It's a great style for training and coaching and that kind of thing. So,
Makes sense.
mhm.
Cool.
Yeah.
The that's cool, because what makes sense, because what I've seen a lot of people do is become coaches, and that's what I'm hoping to do next weekend at least start on that path to become a coach, because I, like, similar to you, I want to know so much more about myself and in turn be able to help people around me, or at least know how to navigate with people around me, because a lot of times I've found myself in work situations where I may be hitting my head against the wall or just frustrated with a certain situation because I don't understand with somebody that's so demanding. I'm just like, but what about the people? It's like, well, they got to worry about themselves. Like, this is what we need to get done, because if you don't get this done, the money doesn't come through, and if the money doesn't come through, like, nobody's working. But
Mhm.
like being able to kind of see those things and understand, okay, in business you have to be more driving, because like at the end of the day you need results. Like you can have I think someone said this recently, where it's like, if you're in ministry and you want to go to business, you kind of have to separate the two. It's like you can still do ministry, but you can't necessarily do ministry and business at the same time, because sometimes like your tendencies in ministry where you want to take care of people may have you overlook some of the like standards you need to complete in order to get like a conversion factor. um
Mhm.
I don't know if I said that right. Like, in order for you to basically achieve a sale, it's like you can be nice with a person, but at the end of the day, if they don't necessarily cut the check, then like you'll be like, you can be nice with each other, but at the end of the day, if they go home and you go home, but you didn't leave with more than you came with, necessarily not wanting to like take something from them, but like they say, every time that you communicate with somebody, like you're either selling or you're being sold to. So if you don't win out,
Mhm.
then you don't necessarily leave with what you intended to in that business type environment where the end goal is to get a sale.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I've worked in the nonprofit world for the church.
Mhm.
I've in the for-profit world, in businesses, and I've worked in academia as well, and they're all very different.
Right.
You got different agendas for all of those, and they value different things.
Mhm.
You don't adopt to or adapt to those differing values. Yeah, you'll in a nonprofit world, if you have a business mindset, you're trying to jam or push something through
Mhm.
when the agenda for the nonprofit may be ultimately taking care of people.
Right.
Uh, if you come into academia, where the agenda might very well be the publishing of books and reports and papers, or the education of people, depending on the institution, but
Mhm.
it's not on making money
Right.
like in the business world, and it's not on helping people in the same way that a nonprofit is.
Mhm.
Just a different, and I, again, having worked in all three of those and having to shift my mind going from one to the other, is difficult. It's challenging, and I thought at one point I really wanted to work in an academic environment.
Mhm.
After 4 years of working at Georgia Tech, I realized it's a
Oh,
great
that's
institution.
right. I
It's a
forgot
great
that's how we
institution.
know each other too.
Yeah, I love the institution. I respect it a lot, and it's a great institution. But I realized I can't work in academia.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I had too much of a business sort of mindset at
Right.
that.
Well,
Yeah.
what's funny about that is that a lot of people would say, or maybe I just listened to a lot of, I listened to a podcast from Malcolm Gladwell, his podcast on revisionist history, and he was kind of talking about the money that goes into academia, especially when you talk about colleges, and understanding like how much emphasis goes into like a big Ivy League school versus like a community college, and just seeing like,
Mhm.
okay, a lot of money, it seems like it goes into buying a new building or kind of like dressing it up. And then you have kids that will go in, and I know the big topic has been recently, like people just kind of get these loans, and like you seem to be paying for a lot of things. You're either paying for the experience or you're paying for this, versus going somewhere that may not look so nice, but you get a similar experience or even a better experience. Like
Mm-hmm.
my like my thoughts on that were, I see his point, because I went to Southern Poly first for my first 3 years, and
Mm-hmm.
then I transferred to Georgia Tech. And by doing that, I was able to save a lot of money up front and
Mm-hmm.
kind of get that close knit environment, because I moved from a small town to a little bit bigger town, and it
Mm-hmm.
just wasn't like a dog eat world like tech might
Mm-hmm.
be for freshmen coming in. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my God, like you got what do they call them? Classes that are supposed to basically separate out the week. It's like, if you're not here for
Mm-hmm.
this, then that too
Mm-hmm.
bad. And
Yep.
I guess something about that didn't necessarily sit right with me. And it might be like we were talking about, like that people oriented, where you're like, okay, you're supposed to be in this environment to learn. You're supposed to be in this environment to like get your money's worth. But a lot of times it seemed like um, you can't meet with the professor because they're traveling, because they've got to get publications, they've got to do research,
Mm-hmm.
because the money's got to come into the school. Otherwise, what they're doing isn't making sense. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like you have to have money coming into the school, and if nobody's paying the bills, then the lights don't stay on.
Mm-hmm.
But in other cases, I was just like, I don't know if necessarily this is the best use of the money, but
Mm-hmm.
that's why you have boards and people on faculty and different things like that. And that's a whole nother thing to understand. But I figure you've definitely seen it firsthand, so you know what that's like.
Yeah, interestingly, like I said, at one point I thought about trying to work in academia, and I approached somebody who was currently working at a different institution, not Georgia Tech,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and but it was also a Division I school, very prominent. And he told me, and at that point, I was this was probably about 15 years ago, maybe
Mm-hmm.
longer. He said to me, "Well, Greg, just so you know," I mean, he said, "not a lot of people are going to tell you this." He said, "But some schools are not interested in the quality of your teaching. So if you would want to go and work in a university because you love teaching and people learning,
Yeah.
depending on the institution, that may very well be not what they're interested in.
Mm.
They may be interested in is getting more publications, making sure that their ranking
Right.
in U.S. News and World Report surveys is in the top 25, and everything's kind of geared around that
Right.
instead of what you're trying to do, which is just being passionate about. And I'm not saying there aren't great
Right. Right.
those places, but that's not always what the institution is most concerned about. And I didn't know that.
Right. That's a big eye opener.
It was a big eye opener for me. I just had this altruistic view of higher ed as being all about the student, and it isn't always, as we
Right.
all know.
And I mean that's kind of the sad thing that I tend to see with a lot of educators. I have some siblings that are educators, and it seems like most of them go in with the thought of like, okay, well, I want to pass on to people what I know, like what I've learned. I want to be able to bring
Mm-hmm.
up the next generation, like I've had great teachers that brought me up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for me, for the longest time, it's funny, my nickname as a child was teacher, and
Mm-hmm.
I guess I was always telling people stuff, but I always kind of like secretly resented it, because I was like, I don't know if I have anything to teach people necessarily, but I was always appreciative of my teachers. And anytime um, I was in class, I did my best to be respectful. Like I'd say overall, I had from elementary school through college, I can maybe count 3 professors that were not good professors for what I
Mm-hmm.
consider and what other people may consider. And I was just like, the reason I saw they weren't good was because they were more focused on themselves. Like you had
Mm-hmm.
one professor that um, within the first year of her being there, it was like she just talked about, I spent maybe 30 minutes talking about her experiences at the last school that she was at, and then trying to teach the last 15 minutes in like an hour and a half class. And people were like, I've got to run, I've got kids, I've got this, I've got that. And it's like, oh no, 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 you don't leave until I dismiss you. It's like, this isn't high school. Like, we're
Mhm.
not going by the bell. It's like, you have a certain amount of time to teach. People pay for that certain amount of time, and you can't just disrespect people's time like that. And I don't think,
Mhm.
like, in these cases, it didn't seem like it was an institution thing, but just kind of
Mhm.
seeing that the difference where you have somebody very passionate, like a very good English teacher. I had my first year, and then I had him again for world literature. Just the amount of effort that he put into teaching and what he taught us about language. And whenever you have a discussion, the point isn't necessarily to win, it's just to have the discussion. Like they say, it's okay to have opposite views, and there doesn't always need to be a winner and a loser. And it seems like a lot of times I'm seeing people now are just like polarized, and they're like, well, like, if you're not with me, you're against me, like, we're on this team. And it's like, no, that's not the only, like, there's not one way to do everything.
Mhm. Well, yeah, we live in a very polarized world, and it's many people are all too happy to just take sides.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there aren't enough people, or at least if they're there, they're often quiet, who
Right.
can take the bigger view and allow people to have differing opinions.
Hmm.
And even in my lifetime, I've really seen politics. I think what Ellen DeGeneres did recently is a great example. I don't know if you knew this, but
Not what was that?
she was in some public place, I forget what it was, and a picture was taken of her uh, in at some event, and she was with George W. Bush.
Hmm.
And obviously Ellen DeGeneres is gay and very liberal in her thinking,
Hmm.
and they show her sitting there talking with George W. Bush, and evidently they're not close friends, but
Yeah.
they have a good relationship. And she caught a lot of flack for that
Right.
because he is so polarizing as a very conservative
Right. Right.
person, and here she is, and she came on her show basically and pretty much said, look, we should and we can and we should have relationships with people who are very different from us. We
Right.
don't agree about everything, but that doesn't mean we can't still, enjoy each other, learn from each other, and all of that. And I just thought that was such a needed and a beautiful statement. And I think we need a lot more of that. I think we need people who are open minded enough and big enough people.
Hmm.
They can value people who are polar opposites of them and
Right.
be civil about it and respectful and have an open dialogue instead of just barricading themselves behind their stances and
Right. Right.
continue to polarize themselves and other people. It's just, I think it's dehumanizing. I
Most,
think we
most
want to make the world black and white,
Yeah.
and it's I think a major mistake that really makes people shallower, smaller, less than they were created to be as human beings.
That's a great point. It's funny because I want to say it goes back to the point of the new assessment you were talking about, because I came across this clinical psychologist named Jordan Peterson from watching Joe Rogan's podcast, and basically he had him on multiple times talking about um, incidents in the news, or just different things coming up where people didn't understand, or they just kept misquoting him and misunderstanding what it was that he was trying to say. And it I just found it more and more interesting to hear somebody that's like a practicing psychologist as well as a professor that goes into the detail to explain what it is that he means, and to be very, like, very, very intentional about being careful with his words. But with him being careful and compassionate with his words, like, he went the approach of, like you said, being bold and saying, like, no, you cannot misquote me. Like, here's exactly what I'm saying. And it's
Mhm.
funny that he had an interview with someone, I think is maybe in England, and there's maybe 22 times in a 30-minute interview. It may have been like an hour, but they cut it down to like 20 minutes for
Mhm.
TV. And within that period of time, every 2 to 5 minutes, he says something, And then the reporter turns it around and says, well, you're saying this. And then like, as soon as he's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. It's like, they just keep getting more and more and more aggressive, just trying to like push a narrative. And it's just like,
Yeah.
this is becoming very uncomfortable. You're being very unreasonable. And just kind of being able to see something like that, it's like, okay, like there's not, there's still nuance in the world. And it's so easy, like you said, to pick a side and just be like, okay, I'm all this. But it's like, well, what made you decide that? Was it just something somebody told you, or did you go like research it yourself? Did you go figure out like what really pleases you, not necessarily what makes you tick? Because it's like, even the way we use our language, it's like, okay, like what excites you, what makes you mad, what makes you this. It's just like you just go from one extreme to the other. And it's like, what about all of this in between? It's kind of like that's what life is. And of course you're gonna have the bad things that happen, and you're questioning like, oh, why? Like, why does this happen to me? But then you kind of have to realize, hey, it happens to everybody, but it's only relevant once it happens to you. And then you're kind of thinking, oh, okay. But if you're able to experience life in a way and kind of take that with a positive experience, I've seen people more times than not kind of become more empathetic towards other people, because they're like, okay, like you've lost someone, I've lost someone before. Now I can kind of put my arm around you and help you along that way, rather than just be like, oh, that's not my problem, just get over it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think unfortunately a lot of the media, whether it's, TV or blog posts or whatever, people are trying to get more viewers, they're trying to get more readers, and so they want to sensationalize stuff in order to get more followership.
Right.
And so they will sacrifice the truth and take out the nuances in order to make it sell better.
Right. Right.
Basically. And again, it's an unfortunate thing, and I think part of that makes me sad is I see a lot of I think that increasingly, it seems to me, I could be off, of course, but that we live in a world that is running at very high speed. And what can be the cost of that is that our relationships with people increasingly become more transactional. And so I don't have the time to really understand you.
Yeah.
Or at least I'm not going to take the time to really understand you, because I got to move on to these other things.
Right.
It means I have to relegate my interactions with you to be very two-dimensional.
Right. Right.
And so I'm going to paint you this or paint you that so that I can sort of put you in a box and say you're this way and not have to deal with contradictions and nuance and personality and all that sort of stuff. And again, I think it dehumanizes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've done that with history. It's what we see when we read or hear fake news. It's, we don't have time to really take into account, again, the nuances. And one of my favorite quotes is a quote by Stephen Covey. I always know who Stephen Covey is, and a lot of younger people say no. So Stephen Covey wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
Probably one of the top 10 best-selling business books in the 20th century. Now, Stephen Covey passed away probably 7-8 years ago, so he's not alive anymore, but great, great book. But one of his things he said, which I love, is he said, with people, slow is fast and fast is slow. And I don't know all of what that means, of course.
Right.
I think a big part of what it means is when we try to go fast and work efficiently with people, we can do it in a way, but we can, in our mind, do a check mark. Okay, I told them this, or I got them on board with that and we did it fast. And so in our mind, yep, did it. But the reality was, they don't really understand. They really trained. They didn't really buy in. So in your mind, the person doing the communicating and training or whatever, you think it went fast.
Right.
But what you're going to discover is that everything bogs down and you're going to have to go back and do it again because they didn't really understand, didn't really buy in, didn't really get trained. And so that fastness is actually slowing things down. And the opposite of that is when we, and this is counterintuitive,
Mm-hmm.
when instead in interacting with people, when we slow down,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what I think the whole, Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare is all about.
Right.
When instead we slow down when we're interacting with people and we counterintuitively take the time, and sometimes we don't think we have the time to take,
Yeah.
but we make sure someone really understands and we make sure that someone really is trained or really does give their buy-in.
Mm.
Taken all that time up front, but in the long run, it speeds things up.
Right.
Because they really are on board now.
Yeah.
And you don't have all those troubles down the road. But again, that's a very non-transactional approach.
Right. But I mean, that makes perfect sense because what I've seen a lot, I've spent more time listening to podcasts, and I've listened to a lot of Joe Rogan because he just has a variety of different guests. And he had a news reporter on there. Yeah, I think that's the proper term. He had a reporter on there, and basically they were talking about how the news has shifted to get instant gratification in order to bring money in, because it's like the stories that take time. It's like somebody could go out for months and months, and then they put out a hit piece, but it's like, oh, we didn't get 1,000 likes or 1,000,000 likes, or like the views. And every time I hear that, I'm just like, that's so annoying because everything, like you said, has become transactional. But when you have a sit down conversation like this and you talk with somebody long term, you have the time to navigate the conversation and express things to the best of your ability. And then that way, if somebody takes the time to listen to it, they can better articulate what you may have meant. And then they can even have a conversation with you afterwards to say, okay, like, I really like what you said here because you had a chance to explain it. And he's had a lot of I think political candidates on there, like Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard, and just different people. And what they've appreciated about it, it's like, okay, you're giving me 2 hours to 3 hours to just come on here and speak about things that are current in the news, things that I value, things that I believe for policies and things like that. It's like, that's so much better than having a 2-minute, 5-minute rebuttal or however they set up that thing. Because I'm like, I don't even remember the last time I saw one of those where it was like, this just doesn't make any sense. Like, you want everything to be fast. And it's like, that might be okay for a child, but like, in a way, it's like we become children again, like not wanting to take the time. It's like, okay, you've got to rush to do this, rush to do that. And technology's become a beautiful thing, but at the same time, it's almost become a curse because it's like a blessing too soon for some, or for many.
Yeah, it unfortunately lends itself to that transactional mindset where we just live by, we get our truth in sound bites.
Right.
Again, it can very insidiously push us towards that black and white transactional way of thinking where all we're doing is telling. We don't take the time to listen and understand.
Right.
And that's the nuances, is by really listening and understanding. And it's going to come back to bite us. I think it already is coming back to bite us in a lot of ways. And I wouldn't be surprised if down the road, this generation or whatever really ends up rebelling against that.
Yeah.
And sort of forces us to slow down some more because they see the wisdom in it.
Right.
But for now, we're certainly caught in that rat race.
Yeah. And I mean, that seems to be a thing. That's like, they say history repeats itself and there's nothing new under the sun. So it seems like the people that get it or the people that are kind of remembered or that have a meaningful life to them are the ones that take the time to study history and kind of see like, okay, maybe this is repeated. So instead of me doing this again, like I'll be 30 next year, and now I'm taking the time to kind of go through Jordan Peterson's like self-authoring program, where he looks at helps you look at your future, what you want to do in the next 6 months to 1 year to 2 years, and you map it out in the sense of like, okay, what do you value? And you kind of go through this process of elimination where you list like 30 things, you cut it down to maybe 10, 5, 3, and then you go to another category and you cut it down. And then once you list out 8 goals, you have to justify your goals, why you set them. It's like, okay, is this really something that's going to matter if like everything burns? And like, is that something you're still going to be able to maintain? Is it that important to you? Like, do you have a strong enough conviction to follow through on what you said you're going to do? And that's as far as I've made it. I need to go back and continue. But the other thing that he says is like, you look at your future, your present, and your past in order to better understand yourself. So it's like you're writing shorts on your life, either like 1,000 words or up to 1,000 word or 2,000 words, just saying like, okay, this is, remember it like a bad time in your life, or remember something that just didn't sit right with you. It's like, okay, now we dig into that. And they ask like psychological questions on the website or within the program. And then it's able to spit it out to you in like a PDF format to where you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, okay, this is where I'm at, and here's where I want to go. And I've already laid out the steps to do it. And I just came across that because of listening to them talk on the podcast and grabbing his book. I think it's 12 Rules for Life. And just going back to that nuance where you have the 12 rules that you give at the title, but then you have this big story or fable that explains and really gets into the nitty gritty. And then at the end, you kind of restate the rule again. I think the first one he was saying was just stand up with your shoulders back and your head up straight. And it's like, okay, I've heard that before, but it's like, here's why. And then just talking about things like hierarchy and like whenever, like the way you kind of present yourself is what makes you, like how you present yourself is kind of the outcome that you tend to receive. So if you see yourself as sheepish and you don't see yourself as like, okay, I need to stand up and be able to bear my burden, that's personal to me. I don't need to take somebody else's weight, and I don't need to make it so insurmountable, but I need to really identify what it is in my life that I can carry. And the better I'm able to do that, then I can help people around me. And I think people have said before, it's like, if you simply start by making your bed every morning, you can make the world a better place. Rather than saying, oh, I'm going to go and save the hungry kids. It's like, that kid will probably be fine for a minute, but like take care of your life so that if you're right with yourself, you don't go mess up somebody else's because you didn't do what you were supposed to do to take the time and like work on you first, and then taking what you've worked on you and mastered, then give that to somebody so that they can kind of nibble on that food and then make their own, and then it kind of like spreads and multiplies.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, I always think of the whole when you're on an airplane, right? And they say if we should lose cabin pressure, adults, please, and if you're sitting next to a child, please put the oxygen mask on yourself first.
Yep.
And if you think about that purely, that just sounds so selfish. Like, what are you going to just let the kid die?
Right.
No. If you as the adult pass out, you will both die.
Right.
The only hope the child is going to have is if you get that oxygen mask on yourself first, and you're in your right mind to help them as well.
Right.
And I do think that, we don't want to be self-centered. We don't want our life to be just about ourselves. But I agree with the foundational concept that you really have to kind of get yourself in a good place first and keep yourself in a good place.
Yeah.
And you're going to be coming from a place where you really have a lot to give, and doing it for the right motives, and, on and on. So.
Yeah. That's great.
We've pretty much conquered all the world's problems here.
If only. Oh,
Yeah.
one other thing I was going to ask you. I know you said you're doing the coaching with DISC, and you do career coaching as well as life coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen like a sudden shift over the past few years, or has it been kind of about the same? Like, you have good quality people doing the same work, or have you seen people kind of starting to masquerade with the title of like life coaching specifically?
So are you asking me specifically about the coaching profession, basically?
Yes.
Yes. I unfortunately think anybody and everybody out there will call themselves a coach.
Mm.
And what a lot of people don't know who hire a coach, and what a lot of people, not that they don't know, but they don't bother to do anything about, who call themselves coaches,
Mm.
they don't recognize that there is a whole discipline of coaching, a way of going about it. Like, we wouldn't think of someone, calling themselves a doctor just because, they've read some books, some medical books, and have a pretty steady hand.
Yeah.
And so they're going to do brain surgery on you.
Right.
No, you want someone to have gone through medical school and to understand the science behind, the anatomy, and what affects what, and the right way of going about doing all these processes in order for it to bring about the desired effect.
Right.
There's a whole discipline of coaching. And I was going to say to you earlier, when you said you'd hope to be a coach, are you familiar with the ICF?
No, what's that?
The International Coaching Federation.
Hmm.
And it's like going to take your medical boards. It's, if you want to, or their bar exam if you're a lawyer, right? It's the body that
Right.
will certify you as saying, yes, you understand coaching to the point where you can be a certified coach.
Gotcha.
And I would encourage you, there's all kinds of coaching programs. Now, the ICF doesn't run coaching programs.
Right. Right.
All kinds of institutions that run coaching programs. You want to pick a coaching program that the ICF recognizes as, they look at their curriculum and have said, yes, this is acceptable.
Gotcha.
And then once you go through your coaching program, then you can apply to the ICF to get certified. And there's 4 levels, 3 levels of, well, 4 probably, of coaches. There's an associate certified coach, ACC. There's a professional certified coach, PCC. And then there's a master certified coach, MCC. And then there's master certified mentor coaches, which are like coaching coaches, So it's a bit of a financial and a time commitment to get it.
Right.
Beyond the credential, the things you learn about the discipline of coaching are invaluable.
Got it. That's a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I guess in terms like coaching necessarily can be very vague, because of the first time I heard coaching, I was always thinking like school, like high school coaches, like those types of people. But then when you talk about life coaches, like a good number of people that I know that do life coaching or like speaking coaches, like I'm sure they have their certification or they're working towards it. But the first thing that I've noticed with a lot of the people that I trust is that their work speaks for themselves. And it goes before them. And I think that's always something that it should be, because if you have somebody just claiming to be something in order to make a few bucks, it's like, that's only going to last for a little while. And I mean, there may be casualties along the way, unfortunately, but the people that are doing it right and navigating it like you are, going through the proper channels to say, like, we have this board of certification in order to make sure that um, we weed out like the ones that aren't right. And it's the same reason you have like a board for colleges to say, okay, this one is accredited because it's gone through and met this. We're not just setting up a bureaucracy to be difficult, but we're trying to make sure
Right.
that people have something that they can know, like, and trust.
And the genesis of it, whatever, back in the 1990s, I think the ICF was created. And they had a lot of foresight because they could foresee that a lot of people were going to all of a sudden jump on this coaching bandwagon, call themselves coaches,
Right.
and at the wild, wild west. And very quickly, coaching can become discredited because they'll hire a coach and the person has no idea what they're doing. And so they don't
Right.
really bring about change and help.
Right.
An example is, I know someone, not well, but I know them and I like this person, but she's a hairdresser, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But
Right.
One of the things hairdressers do is they talk with their person who's in the chair whose hair they're cutting.
Yeah.
And listen, and stuff. And so evidently over time, this person decided to open a coaching business. Now, and I don't doubt her intentions, and I don't doubt that she's gained experience. She's probably a little bit younger than me, but not far younger than me. So she's got some life experience. All
Right.
those things are good things.
Right.
But I don't think she's been through any sort of a coaching program.
Gotcha.
So the model in her head of what a coach is anything and everything, right? And
Right.
a lot of people will be a football coach for a high school and think, okay, I've coached kids on the field, I'm going to become a life coach.
Yeah.
Well, football players and being a life coach are very different. Not that there's no overlap. There's overlap, but it's very, very different. What brings about change in people's lives. So for you and for all of your listeners, if you are interested in being coached, which I highly recommend, I've been coached by a number of people, and it truly can be transformational. That's the reason I do it myself. Right. You want to find an ICF certified coach.
Makes sense. And what's funny about that, a friend of mine that I just put the podcast out for this week, he's a barber, and we kind of talked about what his journey was to becoming a barber. He went to school to do that because he figured, hey, let me go ahead and get the proper certification to say I'm a licensed barber. Like, you went through school, and he was telling me that he started with maybe 20 people, and then there were 3 or 5 of them that completed the program. And then as he's been cutting hair, he started to notice that there's more to just cutting hair. And it's not just you're getting a haircut, but you're getting an entire experience. And with that, he was like, okay, saw a coaching program like the one I'm going to go to come available. And he was like, okay, I'm going to go get coached by someone that's well known. And I'm sure he's ICF certified because he's coached multiple people and helped multiple people overcome things and really get their life together. So it's like you have somebody that I respect very well that took kind of, like you said with your friend, I don't know, but maybe I'd say they're a similar profession, but he took the different approach of saying, okay, I thought well enough to get certified in my profession, but not only to get a barbering certification, but also he went and took a course from a groomer. And he said, okay, I want to be able to provide this additional service. And people were kind of looking like, why in the world would you do that? Like, we don't do that. It's like, yes, clients come in now, and then he can service that other thing. Like if they've got ingrown hairs or something, it's like, okay, yeah, I can do that because I went through the program. I got certified by somebody that's licensed in that area. And then he took it a step further to say, I communicate with people. So I want to be able to better communicate with my clients so that I understand what they're saying to me. And I'm not just like, oh yeah, bro, just go do you. Because it's like, that'd be nice. But he understood that he needed to take it to that next level. And seeing him do that like time and time again, I'm like, okay, like maybe I want to go and do that And like you mentioned, now I'm going to go through the program and then also verify that it's certified, and check back in with the board and say, okay, if this is something that's going to help me personally to either be able to create two careers, to just say like, this is something that I want to do and I'm going to follow through with it all the way and not just do partial.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not saying that everyone who's an ICF certified coach is going to be a great coach, right?
Right.
Just like not everybody who went through the bar exam is a great lawyer. Everybody who passed their medical exams is a great doctor. And I'm not saying it's impossible for someone who's not been ICF certified to be a great coach. You might have someone who really loves the discipline of coaching and has picked up every book and really studied and read, and given their natural gifting, could be not certified but still be a great coach. That's possible for sure. So don't think, again, black and white.
Right, exactly.
But you do want to make sure that you've got someone who's really submitted themselves to the discipline and body of knowledge in coaching. So
it's a great point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. You're very welcome. My pleasure. And again, honored to be on, and thank you for talking to me, Asher, and good luck to you.
Thank you. Oh, before you go, is there any way you'd like people to reach out to you by your website or just social media or anything like that?
Sure. People can either reach me. The best way to reach me is actually just my email address, which is Greg S. Dillon, so GREGS as in Scott, DILLON at bellsouth.net, so BELLSOUTH.net. That's the best way to reach me by email. My website is www.dcandT, so it's the letter D, the letter C for Dillon Coaching, and ANDT.
Got it.
DCandT.com. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome. Good to talk to you.
Likewise. Always a pleasure.
Mine, indeed. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.